Good evening, good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Deborah D. Jenkins, your host for Black Talk Platform. This is a special pre recorded episode because I am under the weather. And because I'm under the weather and you are a very interactive crowd, I don't want to shortchange you by not being able to respond to your questions or comments. And so, as to not miss an episode, I thought let's pre record it so that the information can still be pushed out and others can benefit and they can go back and listen to it at their leisure. As you know, Fridays at 7 p.m. is our new live night because my schedule has changed so drastically that I needed to move it to another day. I actually like the Fridays because it's my wind down time. Um, but nevertheless, the material that I believe that I share or the information that I believe I share is beneficial for the building up of the Black community, and I'll continue to do that. I don't feel so sick that I shouldn't do this, and in fact, I think it's critically important. So much has happened over this past week, as is the case every week. There's always so much going on. And I wanted to give some perspective and context to the reason why I believe reparations for Black Americans is necessary and should be fought for. I came across an article during the pandemic. In fact, there were several articles during the pandemic talking about the economic condition of the Black community. And when I read it, you have to forgive me. I am so congested, but I'm trying to push through because I really feel this information is very important. For first, before I get into it, one of the reasons, well, let me go ahead. I'm sorry. Let me go ahead. One of the reasons why I'm pushing myself, and I know that when my sister sees that I've done this, she's going to be like, she was supposed to be resting. But you know what? When you're on a mission to help your people, sometimes rest has to come last. And I know that's not really wise. I actually went to the doctor yesterday and I just heard back from the doctor. So it wasn't as bad as I thought. But because this is so heavy on my mind, I need to just push this out. It really won't be very long because I don't know how much steam I have. Anyway, the articles during the pandemic. I mean, I love to read, but I was reading crazy during the pandemic. And the articles were speaking about the state of Black Americans' economic state specifically. And there were numerous economists who came to a conclusion, and you've heard me say that here on this show in the past, and you perhaps did not explore it deeper. Well, I want to go a little deeper with you tonight to tell you why economists have agreed that by the year 2053, by the year 2053, the net worth, the average net worth of Black Americans will be zero. Let me say that again. Economists, a broad spectrum of economists, have agreed that by the year 2053, the average net worth of Black Americans will be $0. Up until that point of reading those economic reports, one of which I'm going to share with you tonight so that you can have a reference. We won't go through the whole report, it's quite dense. But the reality is that is what it says. That by the year 2053, the average net worth of Black Americans will be zero. Up until that point, as I was about to say, most of my work had been centered around youth development, criminal justice reform, restorative justice, with a specific interest or emphasis on children of the formerly incarcerated and the formerly incarcerated. When I think about the stigma that incarcerated or formerly incarcerated people have when they come back out into the greater society, having served their debt to society, there's still a huge stigma that they are made to live with. And interestingly enough, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the life of those who are formerly incarcerated, so does their family. Their families have to deal with a stigma of being the children of, or being the spouse of, being the parents of, the siblings of, whatever the case may be, of the formerly incarcerated. They're not easily able to reintegrate into society to become productive members of society by finding employment, finding housing, ensuring that they're able to take care of themselves physically by medical treatment and all of the things that you and I, who have not been incarcerated, enjoy or strive to achieve in our own lives. It's so much harder for them. And I know that there are some of you who may take the callous stance and say, well, that's a result of them having broken the law, or something else that's callous. They made their bed hard, now they have to lay in it. All of these kind of things. I've heard the gambit of negative expressions regarding the formerly incarcerated and even their families. And so that has been, for me, an area where I just sort of lean into to provide help. When we started our church 17 years ago, we started in one of the local high schools, and we needed security. So someone just happened to find us. I don't know how. It's a huge school, but he found us. He had just gotten out of jail, prison actually, because there's a difference between jail and prison. Just gotten out of prison, and he was looking for a job. And he had gotten in touch with his own faith while he was incarcerated. So it was a win-win situation for the church to employ him as our security officer. And I know, again, there are some of you who are callous out there, and you will say, well, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I hire someone who has paid his debt to society? And that's how I see it. And for those of you who are on Twitter, and also those of you on Facebook who want to shy away from people such as myself, who will not be drawn into nonsense, personal bickerings and stuff like that, because it is because I can see the bigger picture. The bigger picture is far beyond conflicts that we create for ourselves and others in social media. Now, in I've said this also before. On Facebook, it's a little different because you typically know those people in your real life. Twitter is just a whole nother beast where you may or may not know someone personally. For me, um, I've been hurt over on Facebook, so I would never come and get involved with spats between people who I don't even know in Twitter, because we share the same view about the Black community. We're going to continue to share those same views. I don't need to be involved with the stuff that detracts from the goal of raising awareness and fighting for reparations for Black Americans. So he was our security guard until the city of New York started requiring that we use their school safety officers, and then we had to let him go. Wonderful. In fact, he was much better than the school safety because we barely saw them, honestly. And they were so expensive at that time. And I never begrudge anyone their salary. It was just the difference in his dedication to what he was doing. And it was just a payday for them, it was overtime for them. And so, whenever I've had an opportunity to help someone who's formerly incarcerated and their children, I've done so. I fight for changes in the law and things like that. And so, up until that point, I had really been in this criminal justice reform space. But what I realized, excuse me, is that because it's already difficult for the formerly incarcerated to reestablish themselves into the greater society after they've paid their debt, started asking myself a question. How much more difficult will it be for them? Are they even considered in those figures um, when they say the average Black American will have a zero net worth? I'd be willing to bet that some of them, if you interviewed them today, would say that their net worth is already zero. It can't get any worse. And they would be right. Because where do you go from zero? You can only go up. So I realized that only fighting for a small segment of the Black community would not address the um, economic downfall that we as a community, Black Americans, are facing in 2053. Let me give you some numbers that I ran. I mean, before I get into the statistics of the article. So, if you're living today, let me put in the proper context for you. Those who are considered baby boomers are between the ages of 58 and 67 right now. Gen X, of which I am a part of that community, we are between the ages of 42 and 57. Millennials are between the ages of 26 and 41. And then you have the babies, Gen Z. They are between the ages of 10 and 25. Those numbers always vary depending on whose research you're looking at, right? But if you want to understand how critical 2053 will be for Black America, let me show you the progression over those 30 years. Next year is 2023. We are 30 years out, 30 plus 2 months out from this dire prediction by national economists that Black Americans will have a zero net worth by 2053. So 30 years, we're going to add 30 years to each of those categories. And what we come up with is this. In 30 years, the current baby boomers will be between the ages of 88 and 107. The Gen X group, my group, will be between the ages of 72 and 87. Millennials will be between the ages of 56 and 71. And Gen Z will be between the ages of 40 and 55. That's where I find myself on the spectrum right now, in the baby boomer group, or just a little bit somewhere. Um, so if you look at the baby boomers, many of them who are on the higher end of that grid, the 107, many of them, it would be safe to say, will not even be here. And the same is true with the Generation X, 72 to 87. We will not necessarily be here. So if I can just focus on Gen X, because I am Gen X, then I can show you why I turned up the heat on the work that I would consider to be my life's work. It's an expansion of restorative justice because that's who I am, a restorative justice expert, right? One who seeks to bring back that which has been broken. That doesn't always mean mending fences between two parties. It doesn't. It means that justice is restored in such a way that if someone is coming out of prison having served his or her time, they should be able to reintegrate into employment, into housing, without their records being a deterrent. That is why I'm proud to say in New York City, we fought hard to get the ban the box on government application, New York City government applications. So you're starting at the same place as someone who's got the same exact credentials as you, except you have a criminal record, a felony record, whatever. They can't ask you about that during the initial application process, but they are able to ask you that if they decide that they want to hire you. Hopefully, they are able to go in there and win those jobs in that initial interview, that it doesn't even matter once they decide that they want to request your criminal record. That's a form of restorative justice, the ban the box. So it's not always the criminal or the ex offender coming out and saying, I'm sorry to the family, or I'm sorry to the store owner for stealing your things, or whatever, whoever they have um, transgressed against. It's not always that. We have to begin to think deeper. So if I think in terms of Gen X being between 72 and 87 at that point, I have two children, a male and a female. They're young adults. They're in that last group, Gen X, Gen Z, sorry. It is incumbent upon me to continue to fight for every right that they deserve as descendants of those people who were enslaved in the United States, our ancestors. Just to share a little bit about us, I don't like to share a whole lot about my family. I feel like I'm public enough and you don't really need access to them. Some of you know them already. But our family vacation, the entire time my children were growing up, was to Myrtle Beach. And we actually just stopped going because of the pandemic. So they have grown up. They're young adults now. They've grown up going to Myrtle Beach. We always had an oceanfront suite or apartment, whichever one we got, condo. They were fully aware that once after they chose their rooms in the condo, they were fully aware of my expectation of them to join me on one of the balconies to look out over the Atlantic Ocean and to think about the ancestors who refused to be taken captive by the horrible, horrible people. Horrible, horrible people. Don't let me get off on a tangent. Who took them from their homeland. And this is not a discussion about, well, they couldn't just take them, they had to be sold. Yep, there were some ancestors who sold our ancestors. Yes, but guess what? Our ancestors here endured so very much. I honor those who, and every year I honored those who decided that they would not come on these shores. That's boss to me. And so I made sure that my children knew that. So they grew up with a healthy sense of their heritage, of the heritage, their personal heritage in our families, and the triumphs made by different family members and the like, the struggles, all of that. My children are well aware of that. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, there is still a debt owed to the black man, to the black woman, to the black child in the United States. And we're only talking about the United States because I think it's important that I educate you all to know that there are international groups throughout the world, specifically in the Caribbean, and it's called CARICOM, who are fighting for reparations. Each island, the Caribbean, has their own. So there's absolutely no reason for us to be even having a discussion as to who deserves reparations from the United States. It's ludicrous, that argument that has been going on for far too long in social media. Anyway, Britain has their own. Lots of different places have their own. Here in the United States, we have our own. And it's for descendants of enslaved people in the United States who I'm speaking about. So not to get too far away from the reason why, I'm letting you know that at least twice a month, I will be doing a reparations series, Focus 2053. It is incumbent upon me, who will be between 78, 72, and 87 in the 30 years that are to come, that I am to fight for everything that was promised to us and we never received. Yes, it's fine to work, work, work. You should work, you know. You don't want to be idle. And please don't believe that Black Americans don't work. Oh, you've been deceived for too long. And I actually think you all know better. I don't care who you are. You know better. We've always worked. um, Let me share the article so that you won't have to just believe me. Let me share the article. I think that's the one I want to share. Excuse me, guys. So, in this article here, that is from NBC News, giving them credit for their work. It is entitled, Why Some Black Americans Might Miss Out on the $68 trillion Transfer of Generational Wealth. Experts say wills aren't just for the wealthy and urge more Americans, and Black Americans particularly, to plan for life after death. That's what I'm doing. I would never leave my children uncovered. Neither of them have children of their own, but guess what? I'm thinking about when they do have their own children and when their children have their own children. And yes, when their children have their own children. It will go on and on. But if I teach my children right now how to prepare for 4 generations out, then they will also be at least equipped to teach their children, and their children will be able to teach their children, and so on and so on. That's what believers in the Bible do. And I take it quite seriously. So let me just read a few um, paragraphs from this very long article, written by Michelle Fox, giving her credit, and dated February 11th, 2022. I'm so sorry, guys. Ugh. When actor Chadwick Boseman died, he didn't have a will. Neither did recording artists Prince and Aretha Franklin. Each time the news broke, there was surprise that such notable names hadn't made estate plans. Yet estate planning isn't as common as experts argue it should be, including among Black Americans. Overall, 33% of U.S. adults have a will. According to Caring.com's 2021 Wills and Estate Planning Survey, according to Caring.com's 2021 Wills and Estate Planning Survey. Meanwhile, 27.5% of Black Americans have one, up from 25.9% in 2020. Despite the growth, Black Americans could miss out on the largest wealth transfer in history, said Bickerson Diamond, co-founder of Black House Foundation, which is a nonprofit aimed at creating new opportunities for the Black community in the film world. All right, look them up if you're a filmmaker out there. Me. Over the next 25 years, an estimated $68 trillion will be transferred from U.S. households to heirs and charities, according to an analysis of high net worth and ultra high net worth markets by consulting group Shirelli Associates. Without a plan in place, probate costs could be 3% to 8% of the value of an estate, said Diamond, a board member of Gentrio, an online estate planning platform. Check out Gentrio, guys. Anything that I'm suggesting, all unpaid. I'm very deliberate about keeping Black Talk platform unpaid because I will lose the authenticity of my own voice if I start taking sponsored money. Okay, there is also a lack of clarity around a loved one's wishes and potential discord that it may cause among family members. Well, we as Black people, we already know that, but believe it or not, same happens in other families as well. We need to start planning for our exit. We're not going to live forever. Let me drop down a couple of paragraphs too. To be sure, Black Americans' median wealth is less than 15% of that of white families in the United States, according to the Federal Reserve's 2019 survey of consumer finances. White families had a median wealth of $188,200 compared to $24,100 for Black families. The median Black household wealth was forecast to hit zero by 2053 in a 2017 report by Prosperity Now and Institute for Policy Studies. But then the pandemic hit everybody, and disproportionately, it was affecting Black communities. And guess what? It accelerated that timeline. So no longer are we looking out to 2053. The timeline has been sped up as a result of the pandemic. We are in a state of emergency now, says Portia Woods. It is not a 2053 number anymore. It is here. Everyone over the age of 18 should make a plan, Woods said. And the misconception that age is a factor, that you're supposed to be old to do estate planning or you're supposed to be wealthy to do estate planning is just wrong, she said. She suggests finding a culturally competent attorney to help you. That cannot be stressed more. What does she mean by a culturally competent attorney? She goes on to say that is one who understands the specific issues Black Americans face. Okay? So some of you are going to say, I'm going to get a Caucasian, specifically a Caucasian who is of the Jewish background because they know money. Well, first of all, that's stereotypical, and we should stay away from those things. But they won't have the cultural understanding that you and I need. So find someone who's culturally competent. And please, don't haggle with them their prices. It is what it is. And this is a huge undertaking. And so you and I should make sure that we get the best. Let me see if I can toggle over to the actual report by Prosperity Now. So the report that came out in 2017, guess what the title is? The Road to Zero Wealth. How the racial wealth divide is hollowing out America's middle class. I'm just going to read a little bit in the preamble or the executive summary here. This says last year, Prosperity Now and the Institute for Policy Studies published research which found that it would take the average Black family 228 years to amass the amount of wealth enjoyed by the average white family today. Can I say that again? Their research found that it would take an average Black family 228 years to amass the amount of wealth enjoyed by the average white family today. They go on to say, as mind-boggling as this statistic is, new evidence documenting actual wealth disparities between Blacks and Latino families and their white counterparts forces us to consider this multi century wait as a best case scenario. Let me stop my sharing and come back to you. They're saying that the 228 years is the best case scenario. Let me let that sink in for a moment. 228 years for the average black family. So, of course, we know not all blacks will have a zero net worth by 2053. We have some very wealthy blacks within our community. And I mean, unless something catastrophic happens, they'll probably still have their wealth and be able to properly estate plan and pass it on, right? Not talking about them. We're not focusing on them. We're focusing on those that the report talked about. We're focusing on me. I'm a part of what I believe is the average black family. And while in some instances we may have a little bit more than the next person, I'm in that category. And so when I started listening to new scholars like Dr. Sandy Darity and reading his book with his beautiful wife, Dr. Kristen Mullins, when I started focusing on the California Reparations Task Force led by Chairwoman Camilla V. Moore. And when I asked her what books could the audience read to understand more, and she says to me, you should really check out My Eyes Are Blue is True, which is a biography about the life of who I call the mother of the reparations movement, Mrs. Callie House. Oh my goodness, there's so much information that we are not consuming because we're just angry. There is a way, and I want to give a shout out to everybody who's been holding these rallies, whatever the size, to bring awareness. And on Twitter, and I tell my students that if you want breaking news, it's not the television anymore, it's Twitter. Reparations has been trending for weeks now, not every day, but back and forth for weeks now. That is because there's a large number of us who are saying the same thing that I'm saying to you tonight, that I have an obligation to my children and their unknown children and their unknown children and their unknown children to do all that I can to make this country do what's right by us as descendants of enslaved people in the United States. I was talking to a guy the other day. It's Caucasian, having a great conversation. And, I'm in New York, and so I have some really strong opinions. They're not negative towards the people, but the migrants. I actually feel like the migrants are caught up in a political quagmire on both sides, the right and the left, that they're being exploited for political purposes. Um, but everyone has heard me, many of you have heard me speak out against the homelessness here in New York. And that during the pandemic, because my mother was sick, my children and I were going 3 times a week to visit my mom. And because she lived on the other side, very close to Manhattan, we would go downtown to get takeout from one of the restaurants that remained open throughout the entire pandemic. It was a ghost town because we weren't told to not go outside, but no one was outside. But guess who was outside? New York's homeless. New York's homeless, they were outside. If you know New York, New York does a census every year counting the homeless. Very little else is done for the homeless in New York throughout the year. That is a big, big issue for me. And so now, with this massive structure being built for migrants that have come from the border states, once again, New York's homeless, who are citizens of the United States and residents of New York City, are being left out. As I've mentioned on this program before, New York City has been under a federal mandate to house the homeless for almost 40 years now, since the 80s, since Rudolph Giuliani was the mayor of New York, and it's never changed. I don't know what it is to be homeless, but I can certainly empathize with those who are. And those who see their city within 2 weeks erecting a structure to house people who are not citizens of this country. And it's just hurtful. But it's really metaphoric of how Black Americans continue to be treated by the United States government. I personally want to um, start impeachment, posthumous impeachment proceedings against President Andrew Johnson, because he is largely responsible for us not being able to close the wealth gap because of the things that President Lincoln put in place for us. And I have to get my sister colleague, Pamela Denise Long, back on the show. Really, really in-depth research on the Constitution of the United States, specifically focusing on the 14th and 15th Amendments, maybe the 16th, but definitely the 14th and 15th. I'm going to try to get her on real soon so that she can break it down for you, so that you can understand why it's critically important that we continue to put pressure on this government to do right by us. Now, there are some who would say that our best chance of getting reparations is with a Democratic president and a democratically controlled Congress. I beg to differ. I beg to differ, and here's why. I want to shout out also posthumously Congressman John Conyers, who, for his time in Congress prior to his death, every year he brought a bill before the floor of the House called H.R. 40, a bill that would establish a commission to study reparations for descendants of enslaved people here in the United States. Following his passing, he passed that torch to Representative Sheila Jackson Lee out of Texas. And here's my thing. Here's my thing. And I listen closely. I know some of you think I talk a lot, and I do talk a lot, but I listen much more than I speak. I really, really do. I really, really do. Here's my thing. Why, if after almost 40 years, and for whatever it's worth, we have Evanston, Illinois. Before them, we have Ashland, North Carolina. And now a whole state that's making a huge splash is the entire state of California with their California Reparations Task Force. The study has been done. The comprehensive study has been done in California. We are so far beyond the request for a study that at this point, H.R. 40 is an insult to our intelligence. And oh, yes, I will not close this show without saying that all of the money that has been sent to Ukraine without a study, just at the asking of the president of Ukraine, and yet Black Americans cannot be made whole by this country, which is as rich as it is because of all of the free labor that our ancestors provided. In fact, many Southern slave owners were paid reparations for the loss of income from the free labor of my ancestors and some of your ancestors. It is so offensive. I'm too sick to really tell you how offended it is. It is how offensive it is to me personally. And so, what are the solutions, you say? The solutions are, um, in my opinion, the first people who are owed reparations are black farmers. And that's not to the exclusion of the rest of us, but I say black farmers because we have lost nearly 20 million acres of land since Reconstruction time. And it's not because we gambled it away, it was violently and viciously taken from many of our ancestors with hangings and burnings and shots fired to the head. You name it, everything these colonizers ever did to our ancestors was done to take and steal those acres. Highways were built through where they lived. The stories go on, and they have not been properly compensated. But those who remain, they have made working the farm their life. It is their livelihood, is how they take care of themselves and their families, and also support the community by the things that they cultivate, whether it's animals or fresh fruits and vegetables. Vegetables, they do it. They have been shafted by the American Rescue Plan because all of a sudden, white farmers who've always gotten much, much more than black farmers, they jump up and they say, oh, that's reverse discrimination. That's what whites love to do. Whenever it seems like black Americans are about to achieve some form of equity. Equity. I never used the word equality. It was always the wrong word. It was always the wrong word. And they knew it. Whitely knew it. They wanted to make, we'll be equal if we need to be equal. I want to be equal with someone who kills others and all the other things. But let's stay focused here. So my thrust is to help the black farmers get what they need. So they were promised 5 billion plus other like Latinos and Asians or anyone who's experienced discrimination and trying to run their farms and get loans and the like. So we have the Inflation Reduction Act now, and the black farmers feel betrayed by the administration. And I feel like it's incumbent upon me. And I have a sister friend, Brooks and Claire. She is really leaning into helping black farmers, and I'm just in the tailwinds with her because mine is a different slant. My focus and solution is to continuously roll out my CBC report. CBC stands for Congressional Black Caucus Report. And it's so funny. I always want to believe in my people. I really always want to believe in my people, and I always have. I was taught that by my mother. My mother was like, "You don't ever go against your own." And I'm a more public person than my mother ever was, so I accepted that, and I'm still pretty much like that. But when I see my own betraying us, betraying my children and their future, and your children and their future, I have to speak out. So my focus within Focus 2053 is over the next 4 years, the next two cycles of congressional positions held by the Congressional Black Caucus. I will be working with the Freedmen Party and others to try to replace all those CBC members who are not working on behalf of Black Americans to get reparations that are owed. It's not a handout. We've never had anything handed to us. In fact, Don't get me mad. In fact, our grandmothers, our great 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 grandmothers, they had to nurse the children of their slave owners. Yes, I'm making the ugly face because that is such an ugly thing. Their children had to share. Talking about getting something for nothing. So don't bring that to me. And yes, I always have smoke for the whites. But what's harming the black community, not I'm not going to say more, but at a rampant pace, is black elected officials who do not align themselves with us. So there's a whole age group that was not captured by the baby boomers. Forgot what they called the group before the baby boomers. The quiet group or something, I don't know. But many of our elected officials are over the age of 67, so they're not baby boomers. And many of the so-called legacy civil rights organization leaders are also at the tail end of that baby boomer or beyond. And guess what they're doing? As the language goes today, they are securing the bag for themselves and their children and their children's children. But they're leaving you and me and my children and their children and their children's children out. And so it's time to call them out. And that's what we're going to start with the elected officials. And so over the next 4 years, if the Lord spares life, that will be my focus. And on this program for the Focus 2053, I will be sharing with you um, reports that I'm gathering on the CBC. I started gathering it back at the beginning of the year in January. It is a lot of stuff. You know why it's a lot of stuff? Because it's so much that they're not responding to in their own districts. Yeah, they come out for your Easter gatherings. They're going to come out, oh my goodness, they're going to come out for your Thanksgiving and your Christmas. And you know, everybody and their mother going to be doing a Dr. King celebration. So exhausting. So exhausting. So we have our work cut out for us. But this is where I'm going to focus. I'm going to focus on um, either moving um, Congressional Black Caucus members towards reparations for Black Americans. And I'm not talking HR 40. You all need to read HR 40 and see how these leaders have inserted themselves in there to ensure that their families are taken care of. But it's not working for us. Okay. So I will be working, that is my project. And I started it in January, and there's always more information to add every day. Every day. I don't know what's going to be the result on November 8th. I don't think a lot of the Congressional Black Caucus will lose their positions. But by 2024 and 2026, if they have not moved towards the grassroots um, focus on reparations, I'm not talking about this lofty, lightly peddled stuff that they're doing. The grassroots leaders, that's people like myself and many others, from California to Georgia, from Georgia to South Carolina, South Carolina back down to Texas, Texas up to Kentucky, Kentucky up to Maryland, back down to North Carolina, up to Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, up to Maine. We're all over. We're grassroots. You don't see us because the mainstream media pushes out those who they want you to see. But over the next 4 years, we're going to flip that. Shout out to the new black media. I'm not a part of the new black media. I'm an independent black media person and black grassroots media. And I do that out of respect for those who coined the term, and I'm not a part of that. Much respect to all who are. because this is where Black people have begun to get their information from people like myself and those others who are part of the Black grassroots media, new Black media, and independent Black media. And we have to keep doing that until we run those traders to our community off the networks. I'm not going to name names tonight, but I know some of you will know who I'm talking about because we can't strategize in public, but just let them know. So, over the next 4 years, we're going to plan to replace the Congressional Black Caucus. Unfortunately, some of them will die out, they'll get sick, or they'll retire, but we want to cultivate our own grassroots candidates for the struggle that is ahead. And whether I personally live to see reparations gotten for my children and their children and theirs, or you and your children and their children and theirs, I may not live, but I won't stop fighting for it because it is what is owed to us. And I feel very strongly about it. So I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm going to stay in my lane and continue to do this report. And again, I say there's always something to report on the Congressional Black Caucus. Oh my goodness, so much to report. And it's very shameful. And I'm going to share this report with you. It comes out of it's not me making up stuff. It is their response to things that occur in the Black community. I might catch some flack from grassroots leaders, and you all can shout me out if that's, I mean, shout me down. But I'm going to give some credit right now to Congressman Benny Thompson out of Mississippi. Yes, he's chairing the January 6th committee, but I've been watching him closely to see how he would respond to the murder of Jaheim. Excuse, excuse me. I'm so sorry, everybody. Young brother, the 15-year-old, um, and the Jackson, Mississippi water crisis. So he is starting on a congressional um, investigation into how pandemic expenses were doled out by the state and how Jackson lined up under that. So I'm giving him his props tonight because he seems to be walking and chewing gum at the same time. And that's what is owed to us when we elect these people to represent us. So shout out to Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi. Y'all clarify, so fix that next time. As I, you cannot afford Black people to ignore the information that I've shared with you. If you don't care about yourself, if you don't care about your children and their children and their children, okay, ignore it. Don't focus on 2053 like I am. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But for those of you who care enough to want to leave a legacy in wealth that's not only cash, that includes land, that includes equity and employment, even carving out a niche for ourselves in an industry. And it also includes an anti-Black hate crime bill. We're also fighting for that. Shout out to Brother Harriet Tubman's Pistol and Sister Phoenix, SBA, for trying to get a bill passed. Shout out those two. There's a lot that we are owed, and we're no longer going to bury our heads in the sand. It's time for us to, like Dr. King said, demand that they cut the check. It's time for them to cut the check. Reparations now for descendants of enslaved people in the United States, for Black Americans. This has been Black Talk platform with your host, Dr. Deborah D. Jenkins. I hope I sound and can speak better next week. God bless you all. Peace.